Before reality TV, before the internet, before influencers were selling you things they don't really believe in. There was a man sitting inside a glass booth. He was sweating under these hot, bright stage lights with 50 million people watching his every move, his every breath, and every single answer he gave, every brilliant, obscure, stunning piece of knowledge that came out of his mouth was handed to him on a silver platter the night before. Now, this is not a story about a cheater. Not really, this is a story about a system of deception that had its hooks in the very heart of American television. And that system, well, it was running long before anyone ever got caught. It's 1955. America is feeling good about itself. The war is won, the economy is humming like a brand new Cadillac, and suburbs are popping up like mushrooms after a spring rain. In the centre of every new living room is the new family altar, the television set. And every single night, families gather around it and ask the same exact question. What are we gonna watch? The networks, they had an answer, and it was a big one. It was called the $64,000 question. The premise was so simple. It was genius. Ordinary people. I mean, cobblers, soldiers, housewives, even kids could walk into a television studio with a head full of specialised knowledge, answer 11 questions correctly, and walk out with more money than most Americans would make in 10 years. Let me put that in perspective for you. $64,000 in 1955. In today's money, we are talking over $700,000. For answering 11 questions, the country lost its collective mind. It was appointment television. You didn't miss it. But here's the thing about a game that everybody is watching. Somebody, somewhere, is always trying to figure out how to fix it. My name is Orion Vale, and today we're going inside one of the most brazen, most elaborate, and most heartbreaking frauds in the history of American media. The great quiz show scandal of the 1950s. So, CBS launches the $64,000 question on June 7th, 1955. It's the brainchild of a producer named Lewis Cowan, and from day one, it is a masterclass in staged authenticity. See, the show's producers understood something fundamental about their audience. For the magic to work, people had to believe it was 100% real. They had to believe in the integrity of the game. So they went to incredible lengths to sell that illusion. First, for the early questions, they had this massive, cutting-edge piece of technology on stage. An IBM machine. It whirred and it clicked and it supposedly drew questions at random. It was a symbol of impartial, futuristic fairness. Nobody could argue with the machine. Then, for the higher money questions, things got even more dramatic. The answers were supposedly locked away in a Manhattan bank vault, and on show night they were transported to the studio under the guard of two serious-looking men. It was pure theatre. And the crown jewel of this performance? The Revlon isolation booth. Once a contestant hit the $8,000 mark, they were sealed inside this soundproofed, specially lit glass box. They even piped music in to make sure there was absolutely no way anyone could feed them an answer from the outside. Every single element of the production was designed to scream one thing at the audience at home. Nobody could possibly cheat here. It's impossible. But of course, it wasn't. The whole thing was a lie. The IBM cards, they were all identical. The machine was just a prop. The bank vault, just a story. And the contestants, they weren't random at all. Producers had a full-time team sifting through thousands and thousands of letters every single week. They weren't looking for the smartest people. They were looking for the best stories. These contestants were cast just like actors in a play. They found Gino Prato, a charming Italian immigrant, a cobbler from the Bronx who just happened to be an expert on opera. He won $32,000, and America fell in love. They found a Marine captain who could describe a specific menu from Buckingham Palace in perfect detail. He won the full $64,000. They found an 11-year-old black girl from Baltimore who was a spelling prodigy. She became a national sensation. The producers were curating outcomes. They were creating television moments. But, and this is a key distinction, they weren't fully rigging the game just yet. They were steering it. They were putting their thumb on the scale. And we know this because of a psychologist named Joyce Brothers. She wanted to get on the show and for her category, she chose boxing. The producers hated it. It didn't fit the narrative they wanted for her. So first they tried to block her. When that didn't work, they started feeding her the most obscure, impossible boxing questions they could find, hoping she'd fail. But she didn't. She knew her stuff. Cold. She answered every single question correctly, became a champion, and launched a massive, successful career in television. Joyce Brothers proved that you could still win honestly, but her victory also revealed the producer's impulse, the impulse to control every little detail, to craft the perfect story. And that impulse, that desire for total control, was about to escalate into a full-blown conspiracy. Over at NBC, the executives were panicking. CBS's. The $64,000 question wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural phenomenon. It was crushing them in the ratings. NBC needed a contender, and they needed it fast. So on September 12th, 1956, they launched their answer, a show called 21. The concept was modelled on blackjack. 2 contestants were in separate isolation booths, just like the competition. And they battled to score 21 points by answering questions. It sounded good on paper. The debut was an absolute unmitigated disaster. It was, and I'm quoting here, unwatchable. The contestants were just regular people, and they kept getting questions wrong. There were 0-0 scores. Endless, boring ties. The sponsor was furious. The producer, a man named Dan Enright, was facing a career-ending flop. He had a choice. He could quit, or he could cheat. Enright chose to cheat. He decided that what his show needed wasn't better questions or a better format. What it needed was a hero, a compelling protagonist that America could root for. He needed a character, and he found his man in Herbert Stempel. Stempel was a 29-year-old Army veteran, a student at City College in New York, and the guy was genuinely brilliant. He had a near-photographic memory. On the show's intake test, he scored an incredible 251 out of 363. Herbert Stempel was the real deal, but Dan Enright didn't need him to be real. He needed him to be watchable. So on October 16th, 1956, Enright skipped the formal auditions and went directly to Stempel's small apartment. He sat with him and went through every single question and answer in the show's entire repertoire. He saw just how smart Stempel was. And then he made his pitch. He looked at this young man and said, "How would you like to win $25,000? Stempel, who later described himself as just a poor boy, said yes. Of course he said yes. But the rigging went so much deeper than just handing him the answers. Enright became a director, and Stempel became his lead actor. He meticulously crafted Stempel's entire on-screen persona. He made him wear a suit that was 2 sizes too big, to make him look ill-fitting and awkward. He insisted on a frayed blue shirt. He told him to get a short, severe military haircut. He even made him swap his own quiet watch for a loud, ticking one, just to add audible tension for the audience at home. The performance was rehearsed every single week. As Stempel later testified to Congress, he would meet with Enright, and Enright would give him index cards with all the questions and all the answers. But he also coached him on the performance. He'd say, "Okay, on this question, I want you to pause, look up at the ceiling, mop your brow, make it look like you're struggling." Even when Stempel knew the answer instantly. And Stempel played his part perfectly. Over 8 weeks, he won $69,500. He became a household name. He was the lovable, nerdy genius. But even as Stempel's star was rising, Dan Enright was already plotting his next move. He was already casting his next hero. The man Enright and his producer, Al Friedman, found was, in every way, the opposite of Herbert Stempel. His name was Charles Van Doren. Van Doren was tall, handsome, charming. He was a professor at Columbia University, and he came from one of America's most respected literary families. He was, as one person put it, a bona fide egghead with enough sex appeal. He was the perfect intellectual champion for a nation obsessed with intelligence. Al Friedman made the pitch directly to Van Doren. He told him he wanted him to be the man to beat Herbert Stempel. And when Van Doren expressed a desire to, actually win on his own merit, Friedman assured him, "The competition is handled. It's already arranged." Van Doren resisted at first. He was an academic. He believed in integrity. But Friedman was persuasive. He reframed the deception. He told Van Doren that seeing a brilliant, handsome intellectual like him on television would be a great service to the intellectual life of the country. He said it would be good for education. He was asking Van Doren to lie for a noble cause. And Charles Van Doren, he accepted the deal. The very next morning, a complete script for the show arrived at his door. The showdown between Stempel and Van Doren unfolded over 3 nights. It was television drama of the highest order. 15 million people were glued to their sets. The first night ended in a 17-17 tie. The second, a 21-21 tie. The tension was unbearable, and then came the final confrontation. Herbert Stempel was given his script, just like always. But this time his script told him how to lose. He was asked what should have been the easiest question imaginable for him. What film won the Academy Award for Best Picture in 1955? The answer was Marty. It was a film about a lonely butcher from the Bronx. Herbert Stempel had grown up in the Bronx. He'd seen the movie 3 times. He loved that movie. He knew the answer better than he knew his own name. And on national television, he looked into the camera and he said the wrong answer. He said, "On the waterfront," just like the script told him to. Charles Van Doren was the new champion, and his life exploded. He was on the cover of Time magazine. He got a regular segment on the Today Show with a $50,000 annual contract. He was getting 20,000 letters a week from adoring fans. He was, for a time, one of the most famous and trusted men in America. Meanwhile, Herbert Stempel, $49,500 richer but stripped of his dignity, began seeing a psychiatrist. He tried to tell his story. He told his barber. He told his pharmacist. He told his friends. He even went to a reporter. But as he later said, nobody published it, nobody believed him, or nobody wanted to. He was just a sore loser. This whole elaborate house of cards, this massive, multi-show fraud, it seemed impenetrable. But all it ever takes is one loose thread. That thread appeared on May 20th, 1958. Not on a glitzy primetime show, but on a CBS daytime program called Dotto. A standby contestant, a man named Eddie Hilgemeyer, was waiting backstage. He happened to notice the current champion, a woman studying a little notebook very, very intently. After she went on stage, Hilgemeyer, just out of curiosity, found the notebook she'd left behind in her dressing room. He opened it, and inside were the exact questions and the exact answers that the woman was being asked on the air, live, at that very moment. Hilgemeyer tore out the last page, went to another contestant, and said, "This is a fixed show." And they did the smart thing. They hired a lawyer. The producers of Dotto panicked. They immediately offered Hilgemeyer $1,500 and a plane ticket home to keep him quiet. He took the money. Who wouldn't? But he went to the authorities anyway. On August 7th, he sent a detailed letter exposing the entire fraud to the show's sponsor. 9 days later, CBS quietly pulled Dotto off the air without any explanation. Within a week, the New York District Attorney's Office had announced a full investigation. And suddenly Herbert Stempel wasn't a sore loser anymore. He was a credible witness. On August 28th, 2 New York newspapers finally ran his full story. Everything. The coached answers, the scripted loss, the lie about the movie, Marty, Van Doren's manufactured victory. It was all there. Van Doren went on the Today Show and vehemently denied everything. NBC issued a statement calling the charges utterly baseless. Dan Enright even tried to discredit Stempel by playing a secretly recorded tape of him, trying to paint him as mentally unstable. But it was too late. The dam had broken. The cancellations came swift and hard. Dotto was gone. Then, the $64,000 challenge. Gone. 21? Gone. And finally the show that started it all. The $64,000 question. Gone. All of them, wiped from the airways within 3 months. The system had collapsed. A Manhattan grand jury was convened. They heard testimony from over 150 witnesses. But then, in a truly stunning move, the presiding judge sealed the entire record. He expunged it, claiming he wanted to protect the reputations of the people involved. The district attorney was furious. The public was left in the dark. It took an act of Congress to finally bring the truth to light. The House subcommittee hearings opened on October 6, 1959, and this time the testimony was public. Herbert Stempel told his story. Al Friedman, the producer, testified. Dan Enright finally admitted to rigging shows for, in his words, many years. But the most damning evidence came from a former 21 contestant named James Snodgrass. Snodgrass had been part of the fix back in 1957. But he was smart. 2 days before his first broadcast, he wrote down every question he'd been given, every answer he was supposed to say, the exact point value of each question, and even the instructions on how to act. And then he mailed it all to himself in a sealed, registered letter. That letter sat, sealed and certified by the US Postal Service, for 2 years. In the hearing room, the subcommittee first played a recording of Snodgrass's actual broadcast. They heard him pause in the exact places he was told to. They heard him name the 7 dwarfs in the coached order. Every beat matched. Then, right there in the hearing room, they opened the sealed letter. It was a perfect match. Word for word. There was nothing left to argue. The fraud was undeniable. All eyes now turned to the one man who was still denying everything, Charles Van Doren. For months he had been evading the committee, driving aimlessly through New England with his wife, unable to face the music. A Washington paper ran the headline, "Where's Charlie?" Finally a subpoena was issued. He had nowhere left to run. On November 2nd, 1959, Charles Van Doren sat before the United States Congress and finally told the truth. He described everything. The deal with the producer, the scripts, the coached pauses. He confessed that he had convinced himself he was doing a good thing, that he was doing real good for teachers, for education, for intellectualism in America. But, he admitted, I had been wrong. He ended his statement by saying, I would give almost anything I have to reverse the course of my life in the last 3 years. When he finished, the room broke into applause. Some members of Congress actually rushed up to shake his hand. But the consequences were swift. Columbia University fired him before the day was over. NBC fired him the next morning. His public life was over. Now here's the most astonishing part of this whole story. In 1958, fixing a quiz show wasn't actually a crime. There was no law against it. Think about it. Nobody technically stole anything. The contestants who were in on it made money. The sponsors got huge ratings. The network got paid. The only party that was deceived was the American public, and the public had no legal standing. The grand jury returned no indictments. Congress decided that had to change. In 1960, President Eisenhower signed an amendment to the Communications Act, making it a federal crime to fix any game show or contest with intent to deceive the public. But the legal fallout was nothing compared to the personal toll. Lewis Cowan, the man who created the $64,000 question, was quietly pushed out of CBS, even though he was never directly implicated in the rigging. He was just the face attached to a tainted product. Hal March, the beloved host of that same show, never regained his fame and died of lung cancer just shy of his 50th birthday. Charles Van Doren rebuilt a quiet life in academia, but his name became shorthand for televised deception for the next half a century. And Herbert Stempel, the man who told the truth first, who tried for 2 years when no one would listen, he just faded back into obscurity. His vindication, when it finally came, arrived too late to mean much. The quiz show bubble had burst. The big money game shows vanished from primetime television for more than a decade, replaced mostly by westerns. When they did finally return, the entire landscape had changed. Networks created powerful standards and practices departments, whose sole job was to prevent another scandal like this from ever happening again. But here's a little footnote to the story, a surprising legacy that is so often overlooked. In 1963, a TV producer named Merv Griffin was talking to his wife, Julan. He was lamenting the fact that quiz shows were dead because the public would never trust them again. He said audiences would just assume that producers were giving the contestants the answers. And his wife, Julan, had this ingenious, game-changing reply. She said, "Why don't you?" Merv argued that giving them the answers would kill all the tension. And that's when she delivered the million-dollar idea. What if contestants could lose everything by asking the wrong question? What if they had to earn the answer? That'll put them in jeopardy. And in 1964, a new show called Jeopardy made its debut. One of the most successful and respected game shows in history, born directly from the ashes of fraud. In the end, this story isn't just about a few greedy producers or compromised contestants. It's about the collision of entertainment, money, and trust. The producers weren't cartoon villains. They were just trying to make television that people couldn't stop watching. And in their minds, protecting that emotional investment, that drama, was the most important thing. They weren't wrong about how to get an audience engaged. They were just wrong about what the audience was truly watching. People weren't just tuning in to see smart people win money. They were watching because they believed it was real. And the moment that belief was shattered, the shows vanished. But that fundamental gap, the gap between what's presented as authentic and what's actually true, that didn't die with the quiz shows. It became a blueprint for reality television, for sponsored content, for influencer culture, for every authentic moment that was quietly produced behind the scenes with a desired outcome in mind. The quiz show scandal was just the first time we caught the system at work on a massive scale, but the mechanism of manufactured authenticity, that's still running today. For the Underground Files, I'm the Clark. If this episode hit different, share it with somebody who needs to hear it. Subscribe and follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Spotify, Apple, YouTube, wherever you're locked in. And if you're feeling generous, leave a rating. 5 stars helps more people find the files. It does more than you think. New episodes dropping every week. Stay skeptical, stay curious, and we'll see you in the next file.